Good afternoon. I'm Hale Esfandiari. I run the Middle East program at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Thank you for joining us. Today's meeting is a very special meeting. We usually host events that deal with political, social, and economic issues, but occasionally we do venture in the world of art and literature, and today's meeting is one of those special occasions. Let me tell you a few words about the Wilson Center. In 1968, Congress established the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars within the Smithsonian Institution as a living memorial to Woodrow Wilson, commemorating his service to the nation with an institution rather than monument. And this institution was mandated to promote scholarship in global and national affairs. In that spirit, the Wilson Center unites the thinkers and the doers, the scholars and policymakers and business people in the confident hope that from their dialogue, mutual understanding and better policy will emerge. Each year, the Wilson Center holds nearly 800 meetings, virtually all of which are free to the public. Our programs on projects, which have increased almost threefold in the past decade, now cover every region of the world and most issues. The Woodrow Wilson Center welcomes outstanding and award-winning scholars, practitioners, journalists, and public intellectuals to take part in its nonpartisan dialogue. Each year, the center hosts around 160 scholars who conduct independent research on national and/or international issues, addressing key public policy challenges. Today's program, Suspended Somewhere Between, is the title of Professor Akbar Ahmed's book and is moderated by my colleague, John Milewski. John serves as the host and managing editor of the Wilson Center's weekly television program, Dialogue, which is seen nationally on the MHC Worldview channel. New episodes of Dialogue air each Wednesday at 9 p.m. John is a veteran broadcast journalist who served as host and executive producer of the program Close Up on C-SPAN for 20 years prior to joining the Wilson Center. He also teaches about politics and media for Penn State University and Ithaca College, and is a regular contributor to the Huffington Post. John has worked with Ambassador Ahmed for many years. He's co-creator, co-writer, and co-producer of an innovative one-man stage show featuring Professor Ahmed titled Waziristan to Washington, a Muslim at the Crossroad. Professor Ahmed is the author of Suspended Somewhere Between, a book of verse, and is currently the Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies at American University, the first distinguished chair of Middle East and Islamic Studies at the U.S. Naval Academy, and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He has taught at Princeton, Harvard, and Cambridge universities. He has advised General David Petraeus, the late Ambassador Richard Holbrooke, and other U.S. agencies on Islam and foreign policy. He's the author of over a dozen award-winning books, including Discovering Islam, which was the basis of the BBC six-part TV series called Living Islam. Following up on his critically acclaimed journey into Islam, The Crisis of Globalization, his latest project, based on extensive fieldwork, has resulted in a full-length documentary, Journey to America, shown at several film festivals, and the book Journey into America, The Challenge of Islam, came out by Brookings Press, July 2010. I must tell you that I spent 8 hours on the plane yesterday traveling from Europe to the US, and I read the book 3 times to make sure that I have one special poem that I like, and that is ethnicity. I suppose that poem somehow touched my heart very much because you did speak for those of us who left our countries and came to put root in this country. Our other panelist is Farzaneh Milani. She is the Grande Dame of Persian literature in the United States. And her recent book, Words Not Swords, Iranian Women Writers and the Freedom of Movement, and Veils and Words, the Emerging Voice of Iranian Women's Writer. And she's also the translator with her colleague Kaveh Safa of A Cup of Sin, selected poems of Simin Behbahani. She has published more than 100 articles, epilogues, forewords, and afterwords in Persian and English, and she has been the guest editor of 2 special issues of Nime Digar and Iran Name and Iranian Studies. Dr. Milani was a Carnegie Scholar from 2006 to 2007 and McCandless Distinguished Chair at Eastern Michigan University for 2010. She was the past president of the Association of Middle Eastern Women Studies in America, and she was the recipient of the All University Teaching Award in 1998 and nominated for the Virginia Faculty of the Year Award in 1999. John is going to moderate today's meeting, and I must say we are all in for a big treat. John, you have.
Thank you, Holly. Speaking of thinkers and doers, let's hear it for our own Holly Esfandiari. Well, our plan is to proceed in a fairly casual manner today. We have a book about poetry, which Hala has already introduced you to, some suspended somewhere between. And so, surprisingly, we're going to read some poems. And we're going to begin with the author, Akbar, if you would treat us to our first reading of the day.
Thank you.
And then we'll discuss.
Let me, before reading the poem, John, thank you very warmly for putting this together, you and all your wonderful colleagues. I want to especially thank Professors Esfandiari and Professor Milani for this panel and for supporting this project. And especially those who are going to be reading the poems and commenting on them. They honor me by talking about the poems. It's this wonderful interreligious, multicultural gathering which really gladdens my heart. It pleases me no end because this is what my poems are all about. I'm delighted there's so many friends in the audience. I especially want to welcome our friend, the Moroccan ambassador, who's changed all his schedules to be here with us. I've dedicated the book to my family, and I'm delighted to see my wife, Zeenat, here, my son, Omar, and my son, Babar. I'm sure he's somewhere in the audience or expected soon. With that, let me read the poem To My Mother. When I walk at night alone in the deep wadis of her sobs, or when I know that each time I drive fast or lays the reply to her letters, when I know that at midnight she sits up praying to her God to keep me warm and whole, when I know that she will still bless me though I give her eyes cause to tears, when I know that all my warts and ways will turn to gold at her simple touch, then I see through her the God she sits rotating her beads to, and then I know that her God will always be there for me to reach out and touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Akbar, I want to ask you, Hala's introduction covered your career as diplomat, as administrator, as academic, and that's probably how you're best known around the world and in this town, but you're also a poet. And one question I have for you is why now? Why a group of poems that you've written over the course of 5 decades, why was it time to publish them now?
John, these poems have been written over decades, a response to different events, emotions, people I'm meeting. So they were very private. They were really written by me, for me, not for a public readership. And then, we decided, the people who are working with me, my family, a friend I met, Andy Shalal, that it was time to publish, and Andy offered to publish them, and I jumped at the opportunity. And I'm delighted that here we are with this great gathering. I'm delighted.
In the introduction written by Dan Futterman, who many of you know as an Academy Award-winning screenwriter and actor, he plays off the title and describes you as someone who is suspended somewhere between. Comment on that. Why that title, and how does it describe your life?
I think, John, we all are in the 21st century suspended. Now, it's easy to misread this expression. People assume it's about suspended between religions and cultures and nationalities. I'm talking of something a bit more deep, a bit more profound. I think we really are in this century suspended by the quest for serenity, for peace, for the Buddha-like enlightenment, and the desire for security, the house, the wife, the kids, the mortgage and all that, the material world. And it's this eternal struggle that's coming to a head in the 21st century. And this is what I'm referring to in this expression.
Hale also mentioned Dr. Milani's book, Words Not Swords. I'll show you what that one looks like. And both Akbar's book and this book will be available for signing after we conclude our program here. I'd let you know that. But I want to ask you to comment on the larger theme of the arts as a form of expression, particularly when it comes to intercultural or interfaith dialogue.
First of all, I want to thank you. I want to say it's an honor to be sitting next to you. And I want to thank all of you to be here and to give me a chance to share some thoughts with you. And of course, I want to thank my gracious and always eloquent and elegant friend, Hale, for such a kind and generous introduction. Thank you. You asked Ambassador Akbar why, as a diplomat, he has resorted to writing poetry, and he had a most wonderful answer. He said this is nothing new, that it has been part of his intellectual trajectory. I want to say, as a literary scholar, that I wish more diplomats will resort to poetry, not only for its aesthetic value, not only because it's elegant and eloquent and fills us with a sense of beauty and hope for the future, but also because, at least in our part of the world, in the Islamic world, it is one of the most perceptive, one of the most important form of history written from the street level up. It gives you a clearer picture of the society, a picture you will not often see in books of political science and history. I am sorry to say that often our politicians, our political scientists look at poetry as only something fun, something you do when you want to enjoy the beauty of the language, the elegance of the language. I want to suggest our politicians, our political scientists need to read a lot more poetry to learn more about the cultures we want to be familiar with.
Does that describe your experience? Did you find yourself able to express things through poetry you haven't in any of your other work?
John, in poetry you have to be brutally honest, because you really are responding to the deepest emotions that we all share: pain, joy, relief, anger. And poetry is not poetry unless it's brutally honest. And Professor Milani is absolutely right. In our part of the world, poetry is so pervasive in society. Persian poetry in her part of the world, Urdu or Hindi in my part in South Asia. Common people, ordinary people in bazaars were constantly quoting poetry. It has a very powerful impact, and it does sum up and reflect a society at that time. And some of the sharpest insights into society at that historical moment will come through the poets, not so much through scholars. Scholars tend to get very bound down in the straitjacket of jargon and ideas and departmental papers and articles.
We're not familiar with that here at the Wilson Center. It never happens. One of the people we've asked to comment, Dr. Moazzam Siddiqui, who is a journalist, a professor, and also the former Voice of America Asia director. If you would, Matt, provide a microphone. Professor, we'd like to hear from you, because I know one of the interesting things you've been doing is some translation to Urdu of Dr. Akbar's poetry.
That's true. So translating from English into Urdu is something very difficult to do, because they are languages that are poles apart. And to describe it very appropriately, I think English most of the time can be described as a language of the mind or language of the intellect, whereas Urdu, and I include Persian and other Middle Eastern and Eastern languages as languages that come from the heart. And another way to describe it is using the Persian Arabic words ishq and aql, love and love in the meaning of intuitive love, and reason and rationality. So these are the two poles when we speak of Urdu and other Western languages, and Urdu, English and other Western languages, and Urdu and other languages like Persian, Arabic. So it's a difficult task, but what made it much easier for me is the way Professor Ahmed has written his English poetry, because essentially his mind is that of an Eastern person. So it is the language of English, but the ideas are predominantly Eastern and Pakistani ideas.
Very interesting. So you wrote these originally in English?
Yes, in English.
Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but is it possible, can you read a few lines in Urdu of the poem that Dr. Akbar just read?
So
Dr. Ahmed
Professor Ahmed read the poem to my mother, and this is the translation of that poem into Urdu. Let me put on my glasses.
Okay. That will also help with translation, vision correction.
अपनी माँ के नाम। रातों को जब मैं तेरे आंसुओं से पुर गहरी वादियों में दबे पांव चलता हूँ, जब मुझे एहसास होता है कि हर बार जब मैं गाड़ी तेज़ चलाता हूँ या तेरे ख़त के जवाब में तसाहुल से काम लेता हूँ, जब मुझे पता होता है कि आधी रात के वक्त तू अपने खुदा की इबादत में मुनहमिक उससे दुआ मांगती है कि मुझे सुख चैन की आसूदगी अता कर, मुझे सही सलामत रख, जब मुझे इसका यकीन होता है कि अपनी गैर ज़िम्मेदाराना हरकतों से तुझे परेशान करने और रुलाने के बावजूद तू मुझे दुआएं ही देगी, जब मैं जानता हूँ कि मेरी सारी खामियाँ, तमाम कोताहियाँ तेरे प्यार भरे लम्स से सोने में तब्दील हो जाएंगी, तब मुझे तेरे वसीले से उस खुदा का जिसकी तू मुसल्ले पर बैठी तस्बीह के दाने घुमाकर इबादत करती रहती है, दीदार होता है, और मुझे यकीन कामिल हो जाता है कि वो खुदा हमेशा मेरे लिए मौजूद होगा कि मैं उसे हाथ बढ़ाकर छू लूँ.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to ask you about this notion of something being lost in translation. If we're looking at the arts as a way to bridge cultures, what is the challenge when it comes to translation?
For me, as a translator from Persian into English, and occasionally the other way around, it is the tone, it is the texture of the language, it is the cultural context. So for many of these words in Urdu, you don't need to explain. Let me give you an example about this beautiful poem, but also about the fact that Professor Ahmed chose it to be the first poem read here. I often say that in Islam we say paradise is under the feet of mothers. And I always say Islamic literature is also under the feet of mothers. Some of the most beautiful, some of the most profound, some of the most emotional poems have been written by men about their mothers. There are more poems, at least in Persian literature, and I don't want to generalize, by men written directly about their mothers than about their wives or their lovers. So you see, that context already makes a difference. It puts it in a literary context that is familiar.
And I saw another interview with you online about this book where you name your mother first when asked the question of who are your inspirations as poets.
I always say three women, my mother, my wife, and my, in fact, two daughters.
Well, our next reading comes from our guest, Professor Melania. We'll ask you to move to the podium. And thematically, I guess, For My Mother is fairly self-explanatory. The poem that Dr. Melania is reading is Sufic Slants, and the theme here, Akbar, spirituality, mysticism.
I think she'll explain it much better than me.
Okay.
No way. No. Sufic slants. And the thought where I will be in autumn, and will any of these ever recall that single moment of total identity? Or will any of these mourn of places half seen, of people half known, of memories half faded? But sometimes it is sad. Then there is a melting that dissolves, expands me to the hushed air, the sinking sun, the pale moon, the tree, the rock, the grass, the leaf, the bird in flight. There is a fish I hear that battles against the stream and wins.
Do we have anyone in the audience who'd like to, at this time, ask a question or react in any way? Drew, anyone over there who, on your side of the room? I just want to encourage you to not save your questions or comments to the end, to think about things as we progress. But I'll buy some time for you as you gather your thoughts. Tell us a bit about your inspiration for that poem.
Again, John, this was written a very personal reaction to a sunset. I was up in the hills in northwest frontier in the north of Pakistan, and really contemplating nature around me. And at that moment, I really almost felt physically as that I've dissolved into nature. It was so stunningly beautiful. What people don't often get here in the West with all the turmoil and violence in our part of the world, how beautiful it is. The frontier province, which now is the playground and the theater of war between the Taliban and the establishment forces, is one of the most beautiful places on earth. The mountains, the beauty of the forests, the beauty of the valleys. And this moment for me was a moment of melding and dissolving into nature itself. I really felt that at times nature around us is what we are and reflects what we are, whereas we create all these artificial divisions. So it had a very strong Sufic theme of almost pantheism.
One of the old adage is that truth is the first casualty of war. Perhaps beauty is the second casualty of war. And during time of conflict, we lose sight of these things.
Yes.
Would anyone like to comment? I want to give you ample opportunity. We're saving yours to a particular time, Mr. Aiken, so we will come to you later. So since no one wants to comment on that, we're going to go.
Maybe I can say a word about the paradox of this very philosophical and wonderful, beautiful poem. The paradox of it is that while there is a loss of self, that singular moment of total, you call it total identity, which I assume is identity with the nature, with the rhythm of life, with coming one with time. So on the one hand, the poem is quite aware of the passage of time. Would they remember me? Would they mourn all these things, half done, half remembered? And yet, on the other time, it's a moment of eternity. That moment when you capture the beauty of that space, it is the ultimate Sufi moment, when you have lost the self, and by losing it, you have found time. You have become one with time. Passage of time has stopped, hence the production of a poem that remains.
Thank you so much, Professor Milani. In fact, I didn't want to go too deeply into this, but the Sufic notion of fana, or annihilation, is central to Sufism. When your own person, your own ego just dissolves and you become nothing, you become one with everything. And that is what I tried to capture, which she of course spotted and I was trying to avoid.
Our next reader is the Reverend Carol Flett, who joins us from the National Cathedral, where she serves as Interfaith Program Coordinator. And Reverend Flett, we're going to ask you to, no, she's going to read from the podium, Matt, so you can take that back and you can make your way up there. And Bill, I'm sorry for waving you off then. We just have the dramatic moment for you later. I didn't want you to upstage yourself.
I appreciate this poem because it's addressed to his son, Umar, who is here today. But I'm also a mother and a grandmother, so I identify with his sentiments found in this poem. Strings of spittle hang at your mouth, you, drooling, helpless, clutching wildly at air, your tiny body, just 6 months old, cannot move at or obey your will. Only your eyes lucidly convey and pierce me with love, filling my being with a strange affection and wish to protect, as I am sure my father was moved in my infancy. A cycle of a generation, some 30 years, separates us in the present and separates me from your state in the future, when you will be amused, humor, tolerate me, and I, drooling, helpless, infant-like, look on you with love in my eyes. The cycle complete, it will be time for me to leave you with your newborn.
If Umar would like to comment, we could hear from the subject. You know, Akbar, my goal is if we do this enough times, maybe you'll write a poem about me someday. That's what, would anyone like to say a word? Yes, hi.
Hi, my name is
We ask you
Nuchi.
to stand. That way the camera can get a good shot of you for our images.
My name is Nuchi Carrier, and I have the privilege of knowing Professor Akbar. I just wanted the two of you maybe to comment on poetry as the way it's been also used as a political tool over centuries, because it is something that moves us. And so it's not just sentimental evocations. I think that it has many uses.
Poetry always in the Muslim world has a very sharp political edge. Sometimes not overtly or directly, but under the surface. For example, when the poet talks of tyranny, of injustice, of God demanding adl or justice, the poet is obviously conveying a message that the ruler or the administrator is not living up to the promise that he should be living up to. So yes, and some of the great poets in our part of the world have been very, very political. One of the most popular in Pakistan, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, was known for a very sharp political edge to his writing and remains one of the most popular poets.
Is there an analogy between the role of poetry in these cultures we've been talking about in this region of the world and the way that popular music was a force, say, in the civil rights movement in this country or during protests in the 60s? Is that a similar cultural use of the arts?
I would say it's the closest. You know, I always think if you want to compare the status of poets in our part of the world, you should compare them to sports celebrities, to rock stars. That's the status of poets. in our country, we have shrines. We go out on pilgrimage to the shrines of our poets. Poetry is a form of scripture. It is quasi-sacred in our part of the world. And to go back to your wonderful perceptive question, let me, Professor Ahmed discussed it in general. I want to give you a specific example along the same line about my country of birth, Iran. In the 60s and 70s, at the height of the rule, the power of the last dynasty in Iran, the Pahlavi dynasty, only poets and writers were the one who reflected the reality of what was going on the streets and in a way predicted that the revolution was coming. Forough Farrokhzad has a poem published in the 60s called I Feel Sorry for the Garden. It's just a perfect analogy of what was to come. Another example, and I can give you a lot more, Ebrahim Golestan wrote a book and then made a movie in which completely predicted the collapse of the system. And then after the revolution, in the early months after the revolution, again, our writers and our poets, especially our poets, were the first one to call attention to the fact that things were not going right. Let's focus on the right of the individual. Let's not focus on big themes like we're fighting imperialism and all that. So yes, it has been not only a vehicle for political discourse because it transcends censorship, but also because it deals not with theories, but the reality of everyday lives.
And your question about the political nature or the potential political nature of poetry was a perfect segue to our next poem, which is At the Khyber Pass. And I'm going to ask Fazia Kasuri to now take her place at the podium. And Fazia is a member of the political party PTI Women Wing chairperson, by the way, I should say. Not just a member, but a leader. And she's going to be reading the poem At the Khyber Pass, which has a political theme.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute privilege for me to be here, not only because I'm a great admirer and a great fan of Dr. Ahmed, but this is a beautiful poem. It's profound, it's very thought-provoking and chilling, to say the least, when taken in its historical perspective. At the Khyber Pass, there is nothing spectacular or even dramatic in the climb or the mountains. But the air is almost tense in its silence, so insolently indifferent to me and my times. Here, all is awe and hush. Far beyond the pass, Kabuls and Samarkands, all that the urban imagination conjures in nostalgia, the mainsprings of conquest that flooded the fat lands this side of the pass. Delhi and Agra, the irresistible lakes of journey's end. The ear strains to hear, and almost does, the distant din of battle, the clang and clamor of men at war, steel ringing on steel, cries of death and hooves, and victory of hooves galloping hard from gore for the secret treasures of the Ganges. Kingdoms rising as swiftly as the stroke of a scimitar and vanishing as swiftly. These putty-colored mountains seem to suggest with supreme indolence, you who would swear and strut and stride, look on us and wonder. They say there was an empire once, and that recently, on which the sun never set. Today, its legacy is a toy train, some cement blocks in tidy heaps to stop German tanks, if you please, and some insignia and escutcheons scratched like military badges on the shoulders of wayside rocks. Fading and exotic memories of Gurkha and Sikh, plump, open-mouthed lizards sitting so still they could be part of the regimental emblem. Like wind they came, like water they left. The thousands of soldiers, the thousands of years, passages long gone, long forgotten, in this catacomb of desire and history. Afridi and Shinwari, and before them, old Tahtara, watch from eagle eyes. O conqueror, gaze on these and wonder. O traveler, be warned and step softly. The hills seem to know, and the air whispers. This evanescent journey, this mad rush will continue, will remain as desperate and as passionate as of yore. But to this end we must come. Silence beyond and silence behind. To this end, teasing imagination leads us and leaves us.
What do you think so far? The readers have done justice to your work very well.
They have, John, and I'm so proud of all of them, and particularly of Fawzia, because she really embodies for us that Pakistan again gets a lot of bad press, but the women in Pakistan are incredible. You know, they're right out there in front, they're impressive, intelligent, and here you have a great Pakistani leader and a great Pakistani woman. Thank you, Fawzia.
Well, and speaking of women who have provided leadership in this arena, those of you interested in interfaith dialogue, our next special guest is someone I'm sure you're familiar with, because Sally Quinn is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Washington Post blog on faith. And Matt, if you'd give Ms. Quinn a microphone now, we'd like to get some thoughts from you.
Would you like me to stand up?
If you would, that would be great, because then we'll get a better camera shot. Thank you very much.
Akbar, when did you write this poem?
This was, Sally, a couple of decades back, and it was not written for the post 9/11 NATO American troops in Afghanistan. This was really reflecting on the verge of the Soviet invasion. And I was looking at the Khyber Pass and the permanence of the pass and the transience of these great world powers that come and go over the centuries. And that's what provoked me to write this.
And did you show it to General Petraeus?
No, my book hadn't been published. I will send him a copy now.
Well,
Frank,
may
you
I
remember?
suggest that you send a copy to the White House immediately?
Sally, you're going to get me in trouble.
Well, I mean, I had many thoughts reading it, but one of them was the sort of ephemeral nature of war. And this poem could have been written thousands of years ago. It could have been written today. And sadly, it probably will be able to be written 100 years from now. And juxtaposed with your Sufi poem, I thought it was really interesting watching the sunset and sort of losing yourself, because in a way, the tragedy of the Khyber Pass poem, which just people needlessly dying and fighting over and over and over again, that somehow those who start wars and those who involve themselves in wars need to lie down and meditate and lose themselves the way Sufis do, lose themselves, because you've got to be able to have that kind of detachment in order to stop the kind of things that we have. I mean, of course, the Sufis are the most peaceful of all people in the world. I mean, they're against war. And so I took it to mean that there were, this Khyber Pass was almost more Sufi than your other poem, because it was so much about losing oneself and meditating and trying to sort of create a peaceful environment. And it just, it made me sad, really, because I just don't think we're there. I would like to suggest that if you have some time today, that you might want to write something about what's going on Capitol Hill.
Speaking of faith.
Speaking of faith and speaking of
Or loss of
politics.
faith.
No, because you know, I'm writing about it today, and I'm looking at what's going on. And I've lived in Washington on and off most of my life, but I've been at the Washington Post for 42 years, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I have seen this movie before. And it just goes on, and the bickering and the fighting, and you know, the times are different, the culture is different, but it's always, it just seems so unnecessary. And you know, you sort of wonder, well, some of these people should just lie down and lose themselves.
Sally, you're reflecting
Go
deeply.
into
You
total
speak for a
Sufi-
nation, I think.
Go into
when
total
you-
Sufi mode.
Sally, you're reflecting
anyway.
a Sufi soul. Wow.
But anyway, that was my sort of observation of your poem.
It was, Sally, it was written, there's a pervasive sorrow in this poem because it really is the futility of human beings who constantly are doomed to repeat the mistakes they're making, and every generation seems to be making it. And here we have the permanence of these historical locations like the Khyber Pass, which is seen from Alexander the Great to Genghis Khan to Winston Churchill to every great general in history come and go. And they remain, the people remain, and in the meantime there's so much death and destruction. And you know, when I think of the people there, and I've worked there, I've served those people, I see that the people being killed by one group one day, another group another day, you know, ordinary man, his wife and children. And in the end he's left wondering, what sort of life am I leading? Because it could be your own people, it could be foreigners, it could be NATO, Americans, Pakistan Army, Taliban, it's just random violence.
It's too hard to even
It is,
remember.
it
It's
is.
too hard to know. I
And
mean, the one thing I thought was the only people who seem to get out of these things unscathed are the lizards, as you wrote in your poem.
Yes,
Who
yes.
sit and watch.
Yes, and then also the
Trees
people,
go by.
you really need to be detached because emotionally you get so drained out. It's so close. I mean, these are friends, relatives, family. And if you can step back, and that's why Sufism and thinking and being able to discipline yourself internally becomes so important, because if you're able to detach yourself, you're able to comment and maybe capture, for no one else, yourself, that particular moment in time.
Thank you. For our next poem, I cannot offer you relief, as far as Sally mentioned. This made her sad. The next poem is about nothing less than the collapse of civilization. It's called They Are Taking Them Away, and Rabbi Noah Fabricant from the Washington Hebrew congregation is going to read this poem for us.
John, introduce it because put
Go-
the context.
Go ahead, please, if you would like to say
Yes,
a word.
I don't want to expose the rabbi too much to your gloom, and I promise you there will be gloom. It's unfair to push him into that. It is set in 1971 when East Pakistan became Bangladesh, the independent country. Before that happened, there was a complete breakdown of humanity in that province of Pakistan. There was mass-scale murder and violence, and the army coming in and paratroops coming in, just people killing each other on the basis of ethnicity, the language they spoke. And I was posted there as a civil servant, a very young civil servant, one of my first postings, and this was a very traumatic period of my life. And for a year, one fully, I couldn't even talk about it. And a year later, I had this entire poem literally pouring out in the early hours. I woke Zeenat and I said, get me some paper and a pen, and literally it came out in one piece, and that is the piece the rabbi is going to be reading. Thank you so much, Rabbi Noah.
They are taking them away. Sullen shine the stars, the moon in agony aloof. So still stand the palm trees. The seasons are bearing my dreams away. Sanity suspended, while all the black horrors of the mind uncoil, slowly, snakily, settle over this land. They came by night, they came in shame, they came to take the weapon and the woman. My throat was dry and chilled my groin, for they are taking them away to the slaughterhouses. Have you ever seen a child's head crushed like a coconut, or a proud man cry like a baby? Women like broken toys, on the rail tracks to Santahar Junction, bright flags fluttering from their thighs. Does it now matter which side did this or why? They were playing these games with death over there in the green lands of Bengal in the year of the Lord, 1971. Oh, the storm that raged under the blue Bengal sky within man and without him, when rape was relief, death a desire, and killing a kindness. Mama, hide me in your arms, for they are taking them away to the slaughterhouses. Incest in the air, foul vapors in every mouth. Will nobody care to break this awful spell? The major swore he saw rows of what looked like round loaves of brown bread in the government college dining hall. These were sliced off my sisters, while they writhed alive in the dormitories above. I'm curled, cursed, and cold, alone in the night's chill womb, for they are taking them away to the slaughterhouses. Can all the waters of the bay, all the tears of the Orient, wash the red stains and ugly scars of hate, inflicted in that single moment of suicide, compelled by an irresistible lust for self-destruction? When a house is empty, the family missing, and silence a way of life, the nights get chilly, the nights get lonely, and in the night strong men break down to cry, for they are taking them away to the slaughterhouses. When Bihari fate was sealed, and Bengali destiny designed, when the scythe was an argument and the bullet an answer, the lords of men, gods of pain, have taken counsel. The unholy juggernaut will move, it is decreed, and none to challenge it. What compulsions drive such men? What fears make them such savages, while reason, so thin on the breast, deserts so quickly? Who was martyr, which one saint, depended only on the language he spoke. To such a fine point is the concept of alienation reduced. For there is no shame like the shame of taking them away to the slaughterhouses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very powerful. Thank you. We've asked Bill Aiken, and Bill, I put you on hold before, but Bill is U.S. Vice General Director of the Buddhist organization Soka Gakkai International. And it's a tough act to follow, but we're going to ask you to provide some commentary now.
Well, I'm getting over my emotional response to
Right.
this, and it was in fact very well read, Rabbi, and very poignantly composed, Ambassador Ahmed. Another image that has also affected me today is from an earlier poem when it spoke of hearing about this fish that struggles to go upstream and wins. And I think that embodies in many ways Professor Akbar Ahmed's quest, which is to fight up against the stream and the current of anger, of animosity, of misunderstanding, of hatred, and to go diligently against that stream. When I thought of that fish, I thought, oh, what a perfect image for me. But I want to share a story, actually, if I can go back to an earlier poem, because first, I have no words to comment on this poem. It's beyond my capacity to comment on that. But I wanted to comment on an earlier poem, and it was a poem to my mother. We had the honor at our center, the Buddhist Center here in Washington, honored by hosting a Buddhist-Islamic dialogue with Professor Akbar Ahmed and myself. And in preparing for that, and knowing that many in the audience would be familiar with Ambassador Ahmed, many would not, but I said, and I was aware of the poems that he had, and I said, we'd like to use your poetry to introduce you to this group. And I said, what poem do you think would be good? And he said, well, how about What It Is I Seek? And I looked at that poem, and it stated his philosophy and the guiding philosophers of his life. And I thought, wow, that's really nice. But then I saw the poem, and I heard him read the poem to my mother. And I came back to him. I said, okay, we'll have What It Is I Seek. But I really want to introduce you to my mother. Because I felt, first of all, my teacher had written also a very powerful poem to his mother. And I think there is something deeply universal, and what moved me about that was the fact that through his mother he could touch God. We have a difficult time to touch God. He remains for some an abstraction or invisible. But through his mother, he could touch God. Through his mother, he understood the forgiving nature, the compassionate nature of the universe. And I think it is through his mother that maybe was the source of the faith, the source of the optimism that makes him struggle like a fish upstream against the current, certain he's going to win. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. It's interesting. We could say I feel like a magician up here, in that you and I have never met, and what you just described are the two bookend poems for our presentation today. What I Seek. What Is It That I Seek is going to be our next poem, and To Our Mother was our first. And I think how are we doing time-wise, Matt? Should we move to the sixth poem now?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay, we're going to do that now, and then we'll see what time we have. We also have one more commenter. But this poem will be delivered by someone not in the room via video. The new CEO, Director, and President of the Wilson Center, Congresswoman Jane Harmon, desperately wanted to be part of this, Akbar, when we told her about it, but unfortunately is in an aircraft traveling somewhere on doing our bidding. And so we asked her to record her reading prior to her departure from DC. So we'll direct your attention to the video screen, and then we'll come back and talk about it. But thank you for those comments, Bill.
Thank you.
This is What Is It That I Seek?
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to read What Is It That I Seek? What is it that I seek? A force of such might it sets me free, a light so bright it blinds me? I heard it in the voice of the nightingale. I know it was in the hearts of the wise. I sensed it in the lover's tale. I saw it in your eyes. I heard it in Rami's poetry. I know it was in Gandhi's gaze. I sensed it in Mandela's oratory. I saw it in Jesus's ways. What is this riddle, and what is its part? What is this enigma and mystery? What can reveal the secrets of the heart? What has the power to change me? It is God's greatest gift. It raises us high above. It is the bridge over the rift. It is love, love, love. Give it in generous measure. Give it as if there's no tomorrow. Give to all you meet this treasure. Give it and banish sorrow.
We've invited Ambassador Aziz Mikur, Morocco's representative to the United States, to join us to react to this one. So, Ambassador, the mic is all yours.
And Professor Milani, an ambassador who's a poet at heart.
Many poets in the room.
Well, first of all, it's the first time that I'm going to comment on poems, but so I'm not going to dare do that. But I've known Professor Akbar Ahmed for 9 years since I arrived here, and we've been working together in many fields, and especially on the interfaith dialogue and trying to fill the gap and try to bridge relations between the United States and the Muslim world. And I must say that we've tried to do as much as we could. I think we didn't achieve everything we wanted to achieve, but we did something. And we were commenting on this yesterday. Now, I've read several books of Professor Akbar Ahmed, but this is the first time I heard his poetry. And it's amazing because really it's something that goes, all the politics that we've been talking about now comes from the heart, and you feel it from the heart. And this is where it's striking. It's amazing. An ambassador, I don't write poetry. I don't think that ambassadors are, we write reports, very boring reports. Here we have an ambassador who writes something really as he feels it, and he makes people feel really differently. Well, this is what I wanted to say, and I must say that I was very moved by all these poems. And this last one was beautiful. The previous one was dramatic. It was terrible. It was really, I've never read something so deep and terrible. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ambassador.
Thank you.
Yeah, a quick comment? Does anyone have one? We're very short on time. Stephen Stern, behind you, Matt, we'll get a quick comment from Stephen.
I just want to return briefly to they're taking them away. Dr. Esfandari in her introduction talked about the play about Akbar's life, in which I was a colleague with John and the ambassador and our colleague Sean. And that poem, we use that poem to go into a chapter called What Went Wrong. And one way that we use it is there are many, many stories of his life that we tell in this play, and one that we just kept through all the cuttings that we did was a story which is the measure of the man as this fish swimming upstream and having victories. It's a time as a young political officer in what was to become Bangladesh, when he called an army colonel into his office from West Pakistan who was brutalizing a Bengali family. I mean, he fancied the wife of the family, wanted to have her or bring in the rest of the family for questioning. Akbar stood up against this, would not let it happen, got the family out of Bengal and told this colonel that he would have to reckon with this young political officer. And with the Sufi background and the love, it is the steel that is in the man that John and I had the pleasure of learning about, which makes those victories swimming upstream from time to time possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Akbar.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're tougher than you look. That's it.
John, I've got these wonderful students of mine here. Could we have one of them, the latest and the newest? Dylan over there, he's just come from
We'll
India.
have
Join me.
very quick comment. A very quick comment. Go ahead. We'll get your microphone. Who has a microphone? Thank you. We're just short on time. I'm sorry to rush you. But.
Well, first of all,
Dylan, stand up so the TV can catch you.
Hello. I'm Dylan Kaplan, and I'm starting as a freshman at American in, I guess, next month. So it's really been a pleasure working with you. I hadn't heard your poetry before, but it's moving. You're all completely right when you say poetry is it's a way of connecting with a situation where politicians, they might disregard it as something trifle or something for fun. But for me, that last poem about Bengal and what was happening there, it really connected, and I felt like I was there with you in a sense. So I feel like poetry is absolutely very important, and I'm very thankful for being here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you for joining us. I should say Professor Milani's book is Words Not Swords, and the book we've been talking about and reading from today is Suspended Somewhere Between. Thank you for joining us, and please join me in thanking our guests. Thanks to our special guest as well for reading and for providing commentary. Thank you.